Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 most unique board games that are in the SideGame library. Now all of these games are wonderful games in general, but they all do something that sets them apart from standard board games, or games that you may have experienced by being in this hobby, and I think they're definitely worth checking out for the things that make them so unique. Now before we begin, I do want to start with an honorable mention. So this is number 11, and this is Bullet. So Bullet is a puzzle game where you're going to be doing some bag pulling, and you're going to be pulling these little bullets out, and these bullets are going to populate a grid in front of you, and it's your job in real time to get rid of these bullets by matching pattern cards, and you do this with the abilities of asymmetric heroine cards. So a really fascinating game, very different, and it really challenges the way that you may approach a puzzle-style game. It takes a little bit to click, but once it does, it is very satisfying. So I just wanted to mention that here. I do mention Bullet a lot on this channel because I really do like it. So that's my number 11, Bullet. Without further ado, let's get started with the list. Number 10. Number 10 is for theme alone. This is very unique. This is This War of Mine, the board game. So in This War of Mine, the board game, you play a group of survivors that are surviving in the middle of a civil war. So this is very real. This is set in modern times and what would happen to a community in this period. So it's very fascinating as you are trying to explore in order to get materials that are going to basically push you through the end of this war. Your job is to survive after all. And this game has a lot of gritty theme to it. It has a lot of events and things that may make you uncomfortable as you play. And it's not necessarily going to be the most fun game in the world, but it's going to be very thoughtful, very challenging, very strategic, and unfortunately, sometimes very random. You're not sure what will happen. But this makes for a very unique, interesting, thematic, and gripping experience that I think everyone should give a try. And that is This War of Mine, the board game, my number 10. My number 9 is a game that came out pretty recently, the second edition. This is Pax Pamir second edition. In Pax Pamir second edition, you play as an Afghani tribe during the Great Game. Your job is to use your tribe's influence and get in with the Russians, the British, or the Afghanistan people that are there fighting in this giant conflict. So this game is very fascinating in the way it tells an emergent story. So as you play, the characters and the players around the table are going to make decisions that influence this giant board in the center. And as an Afghani tribe, you can switch loyalties very quickly. It's easy to jump and to piggyback off of other players, but it's a challenge to navigate that and win amongst the table. The mechanics are very interesting and very different, and this game feels very fresh in what it's doing. At its heart, it is a negotiation game where you're taking cards and putting them in front of you. But every time you play something, you get to do something on the board. You change the landscape of the battlefield. And I think that is super fascinating. This is more of an economic game to me than it is a war game, because really you are deciding when the best time to kind of put things out is, take things, to hold things in reserve. It is really fascinating as you're managing your money, your unit, your troops, in order to make the best play and best advances at the right times. Really fascinating game. This is Pax Pamir second edition. I recommend this strongly if you're into the theme or if you're into a very unique negotiation experience. Fantastic game, Pax Pamir. My number 8 is a real-time game that I think does real-time one of the best ways ever. And this is Project Elite. So Project Elite is unique in not just its real-time nature, but in the fact that it does it so well cooperatively. So in real-time games, you have a 2-minute timer, and then you are going to be actually doing something in that time. You're timed, your actions depend on how fast you're able to do things. But in this game, it is really fascinating because the enemies scale with you, because the enemies move based on what you roll. So it's really cool how it seamlessly puts the player interaction with the enemy interaction as well. So based on how fast you're going, the enemies might move that equal amount. So it's really fascinating. I also really enjoy how this helps with the cooperative nature as a whole, where you are very much asking for help, and it's up to the other players to decide if they want to help you in the heat of the moment. You're not allowed to tell people what to do. So the premise of this game is you are Starship Troopers defeating aliens while trying to complete objectives. So you may be swarmed with aliens, and it's your job to ask somebody for help, and they have to decide if you're worth helping right now at that instance. It's really interesting because the decisions are huge. Everything you do on the board changes something, and you have 2 minutes, and it's frantic, and it's so well done. And that is one of the best real-time games. This is Project Elite. Fantastic game. Number 8. All right, number 7 is going to be Root. This is a woodland game of might and right. Now, Root does two really cool things that I think are very unique for it. The first thing is it introduced a lot of people into wargaming as a whole. So Root is a coin game that has a paint job of this beautiful woodland forest with creatures fighting each other. So right off the bat, it's unique in the fact that it did pull people in with that theme and introduce them to a new genre of gaming. The other thing that makes it really unique is the asymmetry present in the game. So the game of Root has you playing a faction of creatures, and these creatures play completely different. You have an Eyrie that is completely all about programming. You have the Vagabond who's doing quests and moving around as a single piece. You have the Cats who have a giant horde of people already populating the board. It's really fascinating how all of these different factions have different ways to play, but they are united by a single rule set. Unlike games like Vast, where everyone plays differently and there's no really uniting thing, Root really solves this problem of asymmetry by introducing things that produce similarities between the gameplay. The combat is the same, the movement is the same, but how you're doing it is different. You use the same deck of cards, but everybody uses them a different way, but everybody ultimately has that same objective of getting a certain threshold of points. So I really enjoy Root, and I think they did a fantastic job with introducing this style of game and the asymmetry it provides. Amazing game. Number 7, Root. My number 6 is Magic Maze. Magic Maze is another cooperative real-time game, but this one is all about its uniqueness in its limited communication and the way it manages things in general with a small campaign system. So first off, it's limited communication. In this game, you're going to be playing silently, and it's your job to move around your pieces around this board to collect specific magic items based on the color of the person that you are. Now, here's the twist. Everybody's every color. When you're playing, you get to be everything. You're moving everything, but you, as an individual, are deciding which direction to move. So you may have a piece in front of you that says you can only move people north, and that's your job, move people north. Your job is to look at the board and make sure you're being cognizant enough to move things that direction. So this is really fascinating as you are doing this really simple task. You're moving a piece to get to somewhere, but it becomes very challenging as you're relying on other people. So this really is interesting how this limited communication really permeates through this entire game experience. And I also think it's really fascinating how the timer in the game, every time you reach a sand timer space and you flip it, you can pause and you'll say, okay, we can talk now, we can communicate, this is what we're trying to do, break, let's go. And as soon as you continue moving, you're not allowed to talk anymore. So it's interesting, you have these kind of breaks. Now, the campaign system itself, the game itself has you introducing new tiles, and I think that's just a really helpful tool for introducing new challenges to a game like this. And I think it's really great for its very unique communication style, as well as how it introduces new components into the game. So that's my number 6, Magic Maze. My number 5 is Yellow and Yangtze. So Yellow and Yangtze is a wonderful game. It's all about area control, but this game plays unlike any game I've really ever played, other than its brother, Tigris and Euphrates. Now, Yellow and Yangtze has you taking these pieces, and you'll be placing them on this hex-based board, and every time you place a piece, you'll get something, usually. You'll generally create a victory point for yourself, and you'll do an effect on the board. But the way the game works is almost similar to Pax Pamir, but in a totally different way, where you are changing the gain state of the board as a whole, as opposed to just changing it for yourself. When you put a piece on the board, it joins a city. And when those cities connect, conflict happens. So each character has these leaders that are going to be in their area, and whenever leaders of the same color interact, they have a fight, basically. In addition, if two giant land masses connect, you will have a war, and every leader on those sides will fight. Now here's the twist, your leaders can be on opposite sides of the same conflict. You might have one city that has some of your leaders and another, and they get united and there's a war that happens. It is so fascinating. So I think that just the gameplay in general is so unique for this Euro-style game, and I think that the gameplay is also extremely fascinating and extremely rewarding. It reminds me of that Pax Pamir style where you have to be like, okay, this is good for me, but it's also good for this other player. This is risky. Is it worth positioning here? Is now a good time to swap allegiances? It has kind of that idea, but done in a drastically different way, and I think it's amazing. So that's Yellow and Yangtze, my number 5. My number 4 is a very new game to this list, and this is Micro Macro Crime City. So Micro Macro has you playing a giant game of Where's Waldo, looking for clues on the board here. And you can see here, you're going to be using all of these images on this map in order to determine a case. So on the back of the box here, it has kind of the layout of what it will look like. You'll have all of the different clues for a specific case. Now, there are some games that do this, like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, or you'll have games like Detective, City of Angels, or Detective, just as a whole. Go figure, they're all the same thing, same name. But in these games, you'll generally have a task that you need to do, and at the end of the game, you'll answer questions. In this game, however, the questions progress the game. You'll have an initial question: where's the scene of the crime? Your job is to find it. You'll have something after that that says, okay, what happened here? Why did this person die? Your job is to find it. Then you move on to the next part. It has a really great sense of progression, but the mechanic is really interesting because normally in these style of games, your job is to read a passage and your job is to deduce based on what you're hearing or what you're reading. Now in this game, you can see what happened and your job is to deduce based on clues. I think this helps a lot with people who may zone out during these styles of games. I think this is really helpful for getting tangible clues and really connecting things because you can physically see them. So it's up to you to kind of decide where to look. It does a great job with its difficulty progression. It has ways of having kind of players work in teams in specific missions, and I think that's really fantastic. I think they did a lot of good here with Micro Macro, and I'm excited to see more from this game. So that's my number 4, Micro Macro, Crime City. My number 3 is another big one. This is Catacombs 3rd edition, the playmat version. Now, in Catacombs, your whole goal here is to perform a dungeon crawler. It's a 1 through 5, and that might not seem very unique on its own, but this game as a whole is wholeheartedly unique. You're going to be playing a dexterity-based dungeon crawler. Your job is to use your heroes, get through dungeon by eliminate the monsters, and eventually get to the boss and take them out. But you'll be doing this by flicking stuff. If you have a fireball, you can flick the fireball and it'll burn whatever it hits. If you get hit, you take some damage. You can position yourself beside pillars, and that way you're not taking as much damage. You've got actual physical cover that you can take. So I'll show you the back of the box here. You've got all sorts of these different characters and chips that you're going to be going through. Each monster has its own ability, and it interacts dexterously very differently. For example, you have spirits that have to be physically pushed out of the board, and you're exercising them, you're putting them out of the plane. And I think that's just super fascinating. You've got ice characters, you have area of effects that work really well. You have this really cool sense of dungeon progression, and I think Catacombs 3rd edition does what it sets out to do perfectly. So that's my number 3 for its amazing dexterity-based gameplay, Catacombs 3rd edition. Ooh. Number 2 is a much smaller game. This is Game to Pick a Game. Now I have mine in a separate box just so I can fit everything in one, but in Game to Pick a Game, you will be taking these poker chips and you will be actually using them in order to determine what game you are going to play next. So you have all of these different chips with different values on them, and you'll be writing the name of a game that you may want to play next in your game night, and you'll be using these chips to physically bid on what game you're interested in. Now each of these comes in their own little container, and they have values from -1 to +2, but it's really fascinating that this game takes the idea of, what should we play, and turns it into a game. And I think that is just really cool on its own. And the fact that they made a compelling and solid game with it is wonderful. So Chip Theory Games produced this, and they did a wonderful job with it. Now the other cool thing about this game is as you play, you are going to be putting chips next to the games that might be offered. So maybe somebody wants to play Micro Macro, the other person wants to play Catacombs. You're going to secretly place one of your chips on one of those, but you only do the value of whatever's face down. And at the end, you'll flip them and it will add up all the scores and something will happen. You'll check to see who's the highest. So it's really interesting because there's a set value on all the chips, but there are also player powers and different characters you can be, but the game is finished in under 5-10 minutes. It's really solid. It does exactly what it sets out to do. And I just think it's a really fascinating concept, and it's one that I really enjoy. So that's number 2. My Chip Theory Games is Game to Pick a Game. The last on this list is honestly the smallest of all the boxes, but I think that this is one of the coolest game systems, and this is Exit the Game. So my most unique game in the library here are exits. And exits are super fascinating because they are escape rooms in a box that are not constricted by anything. In a game of Exit, you will have components in here that you can manipulate, you can modulate. Even the box itself can be a component. You'll use scissors, you use markers, you'll use anything to, cut up this thing and play a crazy experience. And I think that Exit really thinks out of the box in what it does. So in Exit, you have lots of different clues. So if you do get stuck, there's a great system in place to help you. But there are many difficulty levels, and there's so many of these that are out right now that you can pick from. So you can pick a theme that really fits to you. But it's the mechanics and the puzzle itself that I think is so unique and so fascinating. One of my favorite activities to do, and a great addition to any game collector's or game player's repertoire. Now, the only challenging thing about the Exit games is they are not replayable. So these are one-time games, and that's super unique as well. These games in particular offer a very interesting, very memorable challenge, and they're going to be one that you remember for a long time, and that is Exit. All of them, honestly. So my favorite one that I've played so far, I really enjoyed the Murder on the Orient Express. I think that one was probably one of my favorite. It kind of also has a case for you to perform as you play. So super fascinating, but if you get a chance to try some Exit games, I strongly recommend them. And that's my list of my top 10 most unique board games. If you have any questions about what you saw here, please let me know down in the comments below. What are your most unique games you've ever played, and why? Do you agree with what I said on this list? Please let me know. I'd love it if you subscribed, help the channel grow, but thank you so much for watching. SideGame strong.